have the privilege of introducing our speaker, who actually doesn't need any introduction. And I'm greatly privileged to talk about a few things about him. Dr. Richard Erskine is the training director at the Institute for Integrative Psychotherapy. He's a clinical psychologist with 5 decades of experience in clinical practice and teaching of psychotherapy. He has specialized in the treatment of severely disturbed children, run a therapeutic community in a maximum security prison, and conducted a psychotherapy practice specializing in treatment of obsession, dissociation, and schizoid processes. He has received the Eric Berne Award 3 times for his contributions. He's the author of 8 books and many, many articles, published papers. And his latest book is called A Healing Relationship. Let's now welcome Richard.
Thank you, Freddie. Well, it's a delight to be here this morning, although, I'm used to the big conferences that we've had that I miss the person-to-person interaction. I'm in my little office here, but it's so nice to see these faces from around the world. I picked a topic today that I thought might speak to everybody, whether you're a psychotherapist, counselor, if you're in education, if you're working in the business world as a consultant. I thought about what would I present that would cut across all areas. And so I picked the concept of attunement and relational needs that I use a lot when I've been doing business consulting, when I've been working with consulting firms, or when I'm addressing at the university where I teach in the Department of Education, where we're talking to young teachers about what's needed between them and students. And certainly what I emphasize in my training programs with psychotherapists and counselors. And that is the concept of attunement. Attunement is a 2-part process that begins with empathy. It means being sensitive to and identifying with the other person's sensations, needs, and feelings. And there's a tremendous amount of research that has emerged in the last 50 years about the power and the significance of empathy. But when we're talking about attunement, we're talking about going beyond empathy. It is not just having the empathetic feelings, but it is the communication of that sensitivity to the other person. You know who these 2 guys are? This is Carl Rogers on the left and Heinz Kohut, both who sort of pioneered in defining empathy. But we're talking about more than just having a sense of the same feeling, which is what Rogers described empathy as, or more than just vicarious introspection, which is more how Heinz Kohut described it. Attunement is a kinesthetic and an emotional sensing of the other. And when I say kinesthetic, I mean that resonance within our own body, what somebody else is experiencing. Like if somebody tells you about a death of a loved one, I find my body sometimes reacts in a momentary grieving way as I listen to their story. It's that kind of resonance of letting ourselves really feel in harmony with that other person. Attunement includes sensing the other person's rhythm. What is their rhythm? How fast are they breathing? How fast are they talking? Or how slow? To sense their affect. And I'm talking about the simple little affects, not just if they're angry or scared, but the little subtle mixes of affect that a person might experience. Is metaphorically like allowing ourselves to be in the other person's skin. But then we need to go beyond that empathy. We need to go beyond empathy to provide a reciprocal affect and a resonating response. Because attunement is a process of communion and a unity of interpersonal contact. So when we're talking about attunement, we're talking about two things. A real sense of communion. It's not just conversation, but it is a real communing with the other person. And it's like a unity of interpersonal contact. We become much more together with that sense of attunement. Attunement is facilitated by the psychotherapist's capacity to anticipate and observe the effects of his or her emotions and behaviors on the client. That capacity to anticipate, it is so important in our professional work. Recently, I was doing a seminar about shame, and the group had the article that I wrote some years ago, published in the TA Journal on shame and self-righteousness. And somebody asked me, what was the most important thing I wrote in that article? And I said, it was the following sentence, that the capacity of each of us to ask ourselves, what is the effect of my behavior and my affect on the other person? Let me just repeat that for a moment. What is the effect of my affect, my feelings, and what is the effect of my behavior on the other person? So that is an important aspect of attunement, is the capacity to anticipate and observe. How do I impact that other person with the way I behave and with what's going on with me emotionally? Like this therapist here, her touching gesture, the way she's bending her head, looking, has an effect on this client. The other part of attunement is to decenter from our own concerns in order to extensively focus on the client's process. And this, I think, requires for any of us, whether we're working in education or business or in psychotherapy counseling fields, the capacity to move out of our own concern, to really look at the world through the experience of our client. Now, what makes attunement effective? All right, effective attunement requires that the therapist simultaneously remain aware of both the boundary between the client and therapist and his own internal process. So it's sort of strange. Here, what I'm saying is that you have to decenter from yourself. You have to put your own thoughts, own experiences, everything aside and focus on the client. But here you have to be aware of your own process, your own history, your own interest in reading. And I'm thinking about how all of these books are lined up on the shelf behind this therapist. Those become the influence in his life. Those are the things that are there, but he forgets about them. and he makes that client really central until something happens to stimulate it, and then he draws on this vast array of knowledge to help him interact with his client. In the beginning of Carl Jung's autobiography, he makes a wonderful statement as he's writing to young therapists. He says, learn your theories well. And when it comes to working with your clients, put them aside and focus on the client. And that's part of attunement. It's this capacity to anticipate and observe what's the effect of our behavior, then to decenter from our own experience, but then to make use of all of our experience as a vast resource library that helps us transact with our client. Attunement is communicated not only by what the therapist says, but also by the facial and body movements that signal to the client that his or her affects and needs are significant. Right? That what they're feeling, what they need, even what they're thinking about is significant, and it has some important function. And I think this is a very difficult task for some us to learn. I know that in the beginning of my professional career, it took me a long while to realize that somebody who was feeling very different than me, there was something significant in their experience. Attunement has a very important function. It validates the client's needs and feelings, so that when we are attuned to someone, we are providing a sense of validation for who they are. And attunement lays the foundation then for repairing the failures of previous relationships. I love this little picture that I found because, here's the therapist, whole body attuning to this kid. He's out of his chair. He's down on the floor. I don't know if this is a real turtle or if that's a play turtle, but there's something happening between the eyes of this kid and this therapist that they're sharing together. And I think there's something very important about them being down on that floor together in terms of the communion between the two of them. Attunement is communicated not only by what the therapist says, but also by the facial and body movements that signal to the client his or her affect. And the needs are perceived, that your needs are significant, and that your feelings, your needs, who you are, makes an impact on me. So we're back to this whole idea is that attunement, it goes beyond empathy. It's a form of real communion between people. And I give you an example of that. I've just 2 weeks ago published a new book called A Healing Relationship. That the book was constructed a lot from live videotapes of therapy sessions. So I would watch the videotapes and I would type up, and I realized that here I am trying to write about empathy, but there's no language to describe it. That the empathy between me and the client was in my facial gestures. It was in the timing. It was in the tone of voice. And it was in the rhythm and the interpersonal connection that we were creating. And I could not put that into a written language. So what happened is we decided if you buy the book, you get 4 hours of videotape for free that comes with the book so that you can read the text and my comments and watch the videos at the same time. That's an important aspect about attunement, because so much of the attunement is nonverbal. It is how we interact with each other. So having said that, let's pause here for a few moments. And Lucy, did you get some questions from people yet?
There are no questions yet. There's the one question is more a detail of, will you make the slides available?
Yeah.
So
Well, does
other than
any,
that, not yet, but now that people have time, they can raise their hands and you can call on them if you see that show up, or people can type a question into the chat and I'll pick it up. So whichever you're more comfortable with, go ahead and comment or question.
anybody want to raise your hand and make a comment?
Hello, can I ask a question?
Yes, I don't see you, but keep going.
Yeah, it's Boyan from Belgrade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading your book, A Healing Relationship, and I watched the videos. So I have a specific question. How do you choose the intensity of facial attunement?
I don't know.
Okay,
I
it's practice.
don't know.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just my trying to feel with the other person, trying to experience their experience, and at the same time holding my own.
Mhm.
You know, it seems almost dualistic, but it's like letting go of my own experience and feeling what it's like to be in that client's, and at the same time knowing I'm not that client and I have something different to offer.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
the videos do say so much more than the text, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
I have a question from Miriana. She asks, can you comment on attunement in working with patients with schizophrenic psychosis?
Yeah. Everything they say and do is significant in some way. And I think that is the attitude that I would find. Now, I have not worked with people who are medically diagnosed as schizophrenics, although I've had a lot of patients in my office over the years who have been actively psychotic. But I would certainly recommend reading some of the things from Harry Stack Sullivan. And Sullivan was an amazing psychiatrist where he worked only with severe schizophrenics, and he would make it a point to do therapy by going into the ward and sitting on their bed and listening to everything they said as an important communication.
Lucy,
Yes.
I
Yes.
I want to report that we have 127 people watching. And Richard, I would like, we have 128 now. Richard, I learned this from what I call precisely tuned empathy from Natalie Hamowitz. And I'm finding attunement very similar to this.
Well, Natalie and I were old friends. We, Maury and I taught at the same university together. And
University of Chicago.
yeah. And they were the ones that introduced me to Fritz Perls. Yeah. So I think we've come out of the same background. Natalie did her PhD with Carl Rogers. So you can see the origin of the influence of empathy on Natalie. And my mentor was Carl Rogers' partner. So there's lots of overlap in terms of history.
Will you, are you going to call on the people with hands
Oh, yeah.
raised?
Yeah.
And then we have
So
some in the
I'll
chat
go-
after the hand raises, then we have some from chat. So go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ragaman?
Raghu Raman from India. Richard, so it's very interesting and stimulating listening to you, because you said that, okay, it's beyond empathy. So, okay, so it's something, it's stimulating, and immediately what came to my mind is something spiritual. And at the same time, do you mean that, okay, using all our senses in the here and now, go with the attunement?
Yes.
Okay. So we need to use senses
Yes,
here and okay.
Yeah, we're using our eyes, our ears, but more than that, we're using our skin. We're using our soul to connect.
Mm.
And I think that's what you mean by spiritual, I presume.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Surely, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So being away from past, fully being alive in the here and now.
Yeah. But you need to make use of your past
Okay.
as a valuable resource. So that's what I said. It's sort of strange. It's like to decenter from yourself, to focus only on the client, but then the client says something stimulating, and then I remember some theory. I remember what I did with a previous client. I remember something in my own experience, and I make use of that somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Valerie?
It makes sense.
Yeah. Hello, Valerie. I see a hand.
Oh, yes, I'm here. Thank you. I'm listening and I'm writing extensive notes. My question to you is, I'm interested in applying this information to parenting, and not so much supervision or clinical, but just parenting. How to strengthen generations, strengthen the family home. And I see a lot of applications, but I was wondering, is there anything in addition to what you're highlighting that can kind of help me in that? Because I can utilize this, it seems like in different settings beyond counseling and
Oh,
supervision,
sure.
right?
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, the first step is to teach it to parents. Second step is to demonstrate it with parents. I'd love to have a group of parents sitting in a circle and talk about these ideas and actually do it with them so that they can be the recipients of somebody who is empathetic and attuned to what they're feeling. I don't have access to it, but there's a wonderful article that was written a couple of years ago in Spanish about attunement and relational needs. And the article was written for parents. I should ask her to see if she can translate it to English. But thank you, Valerie. I think that's an important point.
All right. We have a question from Christopher, who asks, do you, before a session with a client, go through a process to cleanse your palate, so to speak, to clear yourself in preparation?
Yeah, probably before every client. I mean, even the course of the day. I don't know if they meant the first time I see someone or
Before a
if
session, before any
before a
session.
session. Yes, I always try to give myself at least a 10-minute break, and not unusual for me to just sit down in my chair or lay flat on the floor and close my eyes for 5 minutes and just find a peaceful place within myself. What I disliked was when the phone would interrupt. But yeah, as much as I could, wasn't always possible. Okay, let's do one more.
Question,
And then
we have, I have several more in the chat, if you
okay.
want.
I
Okay.
just want to make sure
And
I
I
get
see
through the.
Fatma has her hand raised as well. So would you like to go to Fatma? Then I can give you the other ones from the
Okay,
chat.
Fatma?
I was going to ask you, I mean, this wonderfully explained attunement from you. How much of it is an innate quality of the person, and how much of it is teachable?
I think it is all learnable. Certainly, there are people who have that more innate. And generally, I think women have it more innate than men. I think it has to do with the maternal process in many women. But I think the way I watch people really learn it is through receiving it in their own therapy, receiving it in their own training programs, receiving it in their own supervision. So it's something I think we learn by being the recipient of. And out of being the recipient, there's an abundance from which we can then give it to others.
Okay.
Yeah. Lucy,
There-
you had a couple more?
There are several questions that I'm combining. They're on the same theme.
Yeah, let's just take
Which
one
is-
because I want to stay
is
on
one.
program too. Okay.
This I'm unifying it into one, which is when you're teaching a class or you have a class of teens, or you're teaching in a teaching situation with a group, how do you attune in that situation?
By making the students' understanding more important than my program for teaching. What I'm doing right here, I have a long lecture here. I could go on for 2 hours, but I took a break to interact with each of you as a way to make this much more personal. That's just a short, simple answer. I don't know if the person's looking for more depth of my answer or not.
Good
Yeah.
direction for sure. And I'll just validate that several other people have asked really good questions and that we're not going to take time for them right now, but that's not a comment on your questions. So
Yep.
go ahead, Richard.
Okay, let's go back to the screen sharing. All right, let's talk about affective attunement. It refers to one person sensing the other's affect and then responding with a reciprocal affect. And that's the important part. It's the reciprocal response that makes affective attunement effective. Affective attunement begins with valuing the other person's affect as an extremely important form of human communication. And then being willing to be affectively aroused by the other person and responding with a resonating affect. Now, this is important, to be willing to be aroused by the other person. So my client who comes in and tells me about the physical abuse his father inflicted upon him as a child, I have to be willing to be bothered by that, to be stirred in an uncomfortable way in order to be able to sense and fully feel what he's feeling and then be able to respond. So it's like two things are happening at once. He's telling me about his father beating him, and I'm feeling that momentarily, the terror that he must be going through. But I also then have to respond with that sense of protectiveness that he might be requiring. Affect is transactional. We don't normally talk about that in TA, but affect is transactional relational. Notice that I hyphenated the word. It's transactional relational in its nature, requiring a corresponding affect in resonance. Think of yourself being in a group of people and you say something that is emotionally important to you, something that's sad or something that you're happy about or something you're scared about, but you express something that's emotionally important to you and nobody responds. How deadly that is to not have somebody responding with their affect. The resonance of one person's affect to another provides affect contact. Affect contact, that means contact between your feelings and my feelings, not our words, not our touch, but a feeling to feeling connection that is so essential to human relationships. And that's what we mean by resonance, that feeling to feeling connection with the other person. I chose this yin yang diagram because affective attunement may be pictured as one person's yin to the other's yang, but it is together, your feeling together with my feeling and the interchange between us. It is the unity of connection. Affective attunement is the resonance with the other's affect that provides nonverbal interpersonal contact. Look at the unity of relationship between these two people, particularly her eyes and what she's trying to communicate with her eyes as she comforts this other person. I don't know if it's her friend or her colleague or her client, but there's something very wonderful happening here in that gaze. Now, let's take some specific examples. When a client feels sad, the therapist's reciprocal affect of compassion and his or her acts of compassion complete the interpersonal contact. So what you, when you're sad, need from the other person is certainly the affect of compassion, and then maybe even they're doing something with their compassion that more generally demonstrates that compassion via their behavior. Anger is different, though. It still requires a reciprocal response from another person. But what is the response? When it comes to sadness, we have one word: compassion. When it comes to anger, we don't have one word to describe it. I had to use a phrase. What's needed is attentiveness, seriousness, and responsibility. Have you ever been in a situation where you've been angry about something and you try to express it to make an impact, and the other person just turns around and walks away, says nothing? How defeating. They don't take you seriously. Or something different. You're angry and you say it, and then they escalate and they start raging that overpowers your own anger. They're not attentive to you. They're not taking your anger seriously, and they're not taking responsibility for that process. But this is part of that reciprocity, that sense of taking the other person's anger seriously, along with compassion for their sadness. And then we come to fear. The client who's afraid requires a teacher, requires a business partner, requires a therapist who responds with an affect and then an action that conveys security and protection. An affect of security making. I searched for a word for it. I couldn't find a good word, but I had a good sound. It happened. I'm walking down the stairs with my friend. She slips and starts to fall down the stairs. I can't quite reach her, but I go, ah, ah. That sense of wanting to put my arms around her and protect her from the fall. I'll give you another example. I'm sitting in my office with a middle-aged man who's remembering being 8 years old. And his father takes him into the bedroom, and his father has several belts laid out. And he says, choose which one I'm going to beat you with. And the boy is terrified. The man is terrified. He's telling me this story about being 8 years of age. I can't do anything today for something that happened 35 years before. But what I was imagining is putting myself in that bedroom and putting the boy behind me and holding his father back. And I was doing that in my imagination. And suddenly, in the middle of his crying with fear, he looks up to me and he says, I feel so much more protected now that I'm telling you this story. He couldn't know at a conceptual level what I was fantasizing, but somehow he picked that up and he felt it in the relationship between us. That's part of what I mean by responding reciprocally. Or when a client expresses joy, the response from the therapist that completes that unity of contact is the reciprocal affective vitality and the expressions of pleasure. The affective vitality, Daniel Stern in his book, The Interpersonal World of the Infant, essentially says that this is the most important thing that happens between a mother and a baby. It's the mother brings to that baby in all the processes of changing the diaper, feeding, cleaning, talking to the baby, a sense of vitality and a sense of expressions of pleasure in what the baby does. I learned some of this hard way many years ago when I had a client. See if I can give you the short version of the story. But she had been extremely sexually promiscuous. She had been going to the bars in New York City every Friday and Saturday night, picking up somebody, always looking for Mr. Wonderful, always being hurt, discovering a few days later that they were married, that they didn't want a real relationship. And she had been badly used by a lot of men. Then we started working on her relationship between her parents when she was an adolescent and her father's sexual philandering and how she would go with her father to help him hide from the mother. And she one day decided she wasn't going to be involved in those kinds of sexual activities anymore, and that she spent almost a year being celibate. And I went off to Europe for a few months of teaching. And when I returned at the end of the summer, she was all excited and happy. She said, oh, I met this Mr. Wonderful man. And then she said, but don't worry, I didn't go to bed with him right away. And she told me the story how she met him at a party and he walked her home, but she wouldn't kiss him, and how she postponed being any kind of romantic or sexual involvement with him, well, for several days. And then she said, but now he's living in my apartment. And she looked up and she saw the look on my face. And I did not have a look of pleasure. I was thinking of script. I was thinking, oh, she's doing all right for several months that I'm seeing her once a week. Now I'm gone for 2 months and she's right back in the script. And she sees the worried look on my face when I'm thinking about script. And she jumps up and she says, you're just like my mother. You can never be happy for me. And she runs out. So I decided, all right, I'll wait a day. I call her and I say, look, you've got an appointment for next week. I'll be here for you. Night before our appointment, she calls on the phone, screams at me, I'm never coming back. You're the most horrible therapist. And I wait another few days. I put a message on her home machine when she's at work. And I say, I'll still be here for you next week. 2 weeks later, I get a call and say, can I come back? I got to talk to you. And she comes in, she's still angry at the look on my face. But then she tells me, the problem is you were right. This guy is married and he's going back to his family. And then she cried for a while. But what I learned from that is how it might have been wise for me to postpone my therapeutic thinking and simply be there with her expression of pleasure as she had that new relationship. So, just to recap, when the affect is sadness, what they need from us, the yin to the yang, is our compassion. When they're angry, they need our attentiveness, seriousness, and maybe even taking responsibility. When they're scared, they need our affect and maybe some action of security and protection. And when they're happy, they need our vitality and our pleasure. So affective attunement involves a non-verbal communication from the therapist, from the teacher, from the consultant, that acknowledges, validates, and normalizes the client's affect. And unfortunately, so many of us get caught up in our theories. We get caught up in the goal of what we're doing in the teaching or the supervision or in the psychotherapy, that we fail to validate the other person's affect. It is the therapist or teacher's affective resonance communicates that affect has an important function in relationship because it validates the client's feelings. Somebody before talked about Natalie Heimowitz reflecting the same kind of attitude. It's because both of us have come out of the tradition from Carl Rogers. We're both trained at the University of Chicago with this concept of unconditional positive regard, which Byrne simplified by saying, you are okay with me. And that's what I think we communicate when we are in tune with the other person's affect. It's that unspoken message of you are okay with me. Okay, let's pause there for a moment and come back to some of those questions. Yeah, Lizzie.
We have a couple of new questions in chat about what you've been talking about, and I'm going to combine two of them. One is, what if it's a racket? And that's my shortened version of a longer question. And is the reciprocal response required throughout, or what is the fine line to disengage, as Byrne said in Therapeutic Operations, when can the confrontation be done? So I think the racket one and that one are related.
All right, now is my chance to be TA heretical, huh? To be the heretic. What the hell is a racket?
Okay.
I don't know what a racket is. When Marilyn Zeltzman and I wrote the racket system article, we went through and found, I think, 9 different and contradictory definitions of racket. Right. 5 of them from Byrne himself. The other 4 from people who came after Byrne, each trying to define racket. As we looked at it, it became clear to Marilyn Zeltzman and I that we were really talking about script. So when we wrote it, we called it the racket system looking at how is the script lived out in life today. After we published that article, when it came around to writing the book, Integrative Psychotherapy in Action, we changed the word from racket system to script system because we realized it was a cross section of how the person lived the script moment by moment. So I would have to ask the person who made the question, which definition of racket are you using? So, because I cannot respond in general, because I keep thinking of all 9 definitions, which are contradictory.
Well, the more complete question is, how do you attune when a person is giving what a person is giving you as a racket, when it does not feel congruent for you?
Okay.
You want to attune to what else they're feeling and what is underneath the racket. Do you ignore it?
No, I'm always guessing. You know, I'm always guessing what else is here, what's underneath it. And I'm often saying to myself, there must be some reason why they can't be authentic with me. There must be some reason why this is being presented. And to the person at this moment, what they're expressing is important. So that needs my attention, but it also needs my suspicion. You know, I'm wondering what's underneath it. I'd have to, you know, we'd have to have a real clinical example. But let me come back to the part, when do you engage in confrontation? Because again, this is something I think I've learned the hard way, as many TA therapists have. Those of you who've been around for a long time know that confrontation was the intervention of choice of the 1970s. And it was sort of, when in doubt, make a confrontation. And what we have found is how much shaming confrontation produces in our clients. I remember some years ago doing a conference in Europe, and we were talking about confrontation. And I asked a group of 90 people, was there anybody in the room who hadn't been hurt by confrontation? I mean, who had been hurt by confrontation? Every single person in the room raised their hand. Right. So that confrontation can be extremely painful, shaming, and disruptive of the therapy. Now, when is it useful? And I do use confrontation, but it can only be useful when the person, the receiver, has the conviction that this therapist or this teacher or this supervisor is highly invested in my welfare. So that if I don't feel that you're invested in me, I'm going to put up some kind of a barrier to the confrontation, or I'm going to lapse into shame. But if I feel that you are invested in me, in my benefit, in my welfare, then come on, give it to me. Say anything that I need to really hear, because I know that this is about my welfare, not about making you comfortable by making the confrontation. So I think there's a lot that goes behind that complex question.
Yes, and thank you to Kale Thigpen for asking one of them, and to Kusalya K asking the other one. And there's one more, I think, that is so close to what you've been saying. Can you, Rocky Jane?
Yeah, let me just make a comment too. I want to say something about history of TA. Byrne, in his teaching and in his seminars, was not very empathetic. However, 2 people who have been his patients tell me that in the consulting room, when they were in therapy with him, he was extremely empathetic and very much the good father kind of image. So there's a difference between Byrne publicly and Byrne in his therapy office.
Thank you for adding that. Rocky Jane asked, will you explain a little more about what do you mean by responsibility as reciprocation for anger?
Well, let's assume that the person is angry at you. You've got an appointment and you kept them waiting 10 minutes and they come in and they are angry. Right? Where they don't need you to make an excuse for yourself. Even though it was an emergency, you might have been on the phone with, they don't need to hear that. What they need you to do is to take their anger seriously and say, yes, you've got a right to be angry. I'm 10 minutes late. To take it seriously and then say, all right, and here's how I would like to fix it for you. We're going to go 10 minutes overtime, or I'll make sure that never happens again. Or just say, no, I can't do anything about it now, but I wish I could turn back the clock and I would not have answered that phone call. Something like that, that shows that the responsibility lies with me. It's not something in you.
Thank you. There are a couple of other questions that are just does normalize the client's affect mean validate, and that's pretty much what's come in.
Yeah, that you got validation and normalization, two different functions. They often overlap. Validation is to imply to somebody that your feeling is significant, that it has value, it's there for some important purpose, that feeling has some internal psychological function, rather than just discount it and say, oh, that's your feeling, or to minimize it. It values it. Normalization is to put it into the normal realm. Of course, anybody else in that same situation would feel that. That's a normal response. Now, I'm often, when I'm doing normalization or validation, I'm not even using those words. I'm not saying it's normal, but I'm transacting with the person that says that's a normal response.
That's a very good answer. Thank you. And Tin in Belgium, you might want to raise your hand because I'm not sure what exactly what you're asking. What's in here is link with integrating adult.
Hi, yes, I was just curious. There was another question, whether it was linked to an ego state. And the way you described it, it sounds more like a sensory experience that you are both sharing. And I was curious if you bring it back to the ego state theory, because I also like your little snippets of that going along with this talk. I was curious if it is more something from intuition, so maybe a bit more from child than. But again, you say there's suspicion.
And we're gonna have to talk about what do you mean by ego states, because I think intuition is an adult function, not a child function. Children have intuition, but if I'm in a child ego state, I have the intuition of years ago, which is minimal and not an adult's. So I think we'd have to have quite a talk, Tim, about what do you mean by ego states? But let me give you a brief version. All right. Taking Burns' idea of the adult ego state is ethos, pathos, logos, and technos. Just add technos, okay? Ethos, a sense of ethics and connection, a sense of responsibility, a moral connection in the world. Pathos, attunement, empathy, the ability to really feel the other person and to bring something to them in resonance, pathos. Logos, logic, the ability to think as the grown-up person we are, to make use of our history in a constructive way, but not to be living that history. And technos is the ability to create, the ability to build things, to make things, to be technological, to put theoretical ideas together. And so that's what Byrne described, with my adding the technos, the capacity of the integrating adult who is always growing, always taking new experiences, always learning, with ethos, pathos, logos, and technos. And that the child ego state represents the fixations of the personality at the time of traumas. So how many child ego states are there? Probably in direct proportion to the number of significant traumatic events that were never resolved. Now that's Byrne's original understanding of ego states that he got from Paul Verdern. And it's the theory that runs central through my work. If you want to read about it, there's an article in 1981 with Rebecca Troutman on models of ego states. Then in the early 90s, I wrote another article about ego states. The simplest one place to read about it is the article called Transference and Transactions. And although the article was about transference, 90% of the article was about defining ego states so I could be able to talk about transference.
Mhm.
And Transactional Analysis Journal, I think that was done in the early 90s, Transference and Transactions. But it's a good question because there are so many different ideas about ego states that I think for us to have a consistent use of it in psychotherapy, we need to just stick to one model at a time.
Thank
And
you.
the model I'm using most of the time is Byrne's original model that he wrote in TA and Psychotherapy. And then I've gone back to Paul Verdern, who was Byrne's teacher and has studied all of Verdern's writings. So.
Thank you, Richard. A couple more that you might want to quickly address. One is just, does taking notes hinder attunement? And the other is, what's the difference between attunement and adaptation?
Okay, taking notes. Particularly when people tell me a dream, I almost always grab my notepad and I take notes because I want to capture exactly the words they used in the first telling of the dream.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, I don't usually take notes, although I will make notes to myself at the end of the session to read before a future session, just to keep me on the same track so I don't forget something important. And it's usually about what we didn't discuss and I wished we had. Yeah, if you're taking lots of notes, I think you're going to get caught up in the note taking. You're going to get, for me, I get caught up in how to spell the word, since I'm a bad speller. I would find it distracting for me to really be tuned in to the person. But some people are very adept at doing that. I notice some of you sitting here taking copious notes while I'm talking, and others of you are not taking any. I think you've got to have your own style. And what was the second part of that question, Lucy?
Second was, what's the difference between attunement and adaptation?
Okay, we got to bring in a couple of other things. Two other words: accommodation, adaptation, attunement, and confluence. Right. One of the things I run into problems with Gestalt therapists all the time when I'm working in the Gestalt group and teaching attunement, they say, but what about confluence? Are you mixing two people together and therefore you have no real contact because you become confluent where there's no boundary between the two of you? Right. I think they make a mistake that attunement is really about keeping the boundary. It's feeling what the other person feels, but also responding according to what they need. It's the yin to the yang. Is it adapting? Perhaps. But is it in conscious awareness? Am I doing it by choice? Or am I doing it out of awareness? Am I doing it unconsciously? And therefore it becomes confluence. It's the loss of connection between two people. Then you have another concept that I wish Byrne had used. Rather than talking about the adapted child, I wish he had used the word accommodated. Those of you who have studied Piaget know that Piaget made a distinction between accommodation and adaptation. Right? Adaptation is what I've done here. I'm doing this program at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. It wasn't particularly my first choice to do it, but the organizers wanted it 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. Okay, I can do that. I can fit into that. That's adaptation. Accommodation, according to Piaget, is when we fundamentally change who we are. And when Byrne is talking about the adapted child, I don't think he's talking about a child who's willing to go along with something. He's talking about a child who has been fundamentally changed, who has significantly altered his own way of thinking or feeling, has given up on his own free choice to follow the dictates of the family. Now that's accommodation. So if you think of it in terms of adaptation in the looser sense that I'm using it, yes, in some ways I want to adapt myself to what the other person's feeling, but also at the same time, know my own true response and to work with both of those as part of me. Okay, one more and then I need a 2-minute break.
I think we're caught up and I think it's a good time for a 2-minute break.
You think 2 minutes is enough or do you need 5? Let's take 5. All right, let's take 5 and we'll start at 10 after the hour and I'll be right back.
Lucy, do you want to offer for some time for people to visit?
Linda, do you see that on the screen? Linda, do you see the book on the screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't paying attention.
I see you.
Richard, can you hear me if I ask you a quick question?
Now I can.
Okay. I'm wondering if people are experiencing or worried about everything you're talking about in relation to remote work. I'm still doing remote work, and I find it an incredibly important missing component therapeutically. So if you might perhaps respond to that at some point.
I have to write an hour-long speech next week called Psychotherapy in the Time of COVID-19.
Thank you. I'll be looking.
And I don't know, I'm doing it for the International Integrated Psychotherapy Association. And I don't quite know what I'm going to say, except I have my first line. And that is to steal it from Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities.
Very good.
It's the worst of time and the best of time.
Well,
I know I've been doing some research by calling people and asking them how the therapy is going online.
Okay.
And some people say it's splendid, it's better than ever. And other people say it's horrible, they can't make it work. And it depends on the clients. Like people who tend to be more on the borderline spectrum, who have a lot of emotional dysregulation, who have a lot of early affect confusion, don't do well online. People who tend to be more schizoid, more withdrawn, do much better online.
Well, I'm experiencing people liking the telephone versus Zoom or online. And I prefer the telephone to Zoom.
I have one client that I've been carried over from New York days that I talk to him at 7 o'clock in the morning on the telephone, and I sit with a cup of tea in my big easy chair and I close my eyes again. And I've almost always worked with him with my eyes closed, but I'm following his breathing pattern. We're going to get to rhythmic attunement in the morning. I mean, in a moment, but in the mornings when I'm listening to him, I'm really tuned into his rhythm and how he breathes and the sound of his voice, because I'm working like a blind man. My eyes are closed.
Well,
I find Skype impossible for me.
I hate it, but yeah. I'm concerned about people who are more comfortable versus who are feeling protective of revelation of feelings and affect. So I've been trying to sort that out in my own head.
You're talking about therapist or the client?
Both, actually. But no, the client. Yes. Yes.
I've been doing a whole series of Zoom seminars, and I have people saying to me, come do a live workshop because I can't do a Zoom seminar. And I've got other people saying, oh, give me more of this. This is wonderful. So we're really getting two very different reactions from people.
I agree.
Yeah.
I've done some Zoom seminars for professional organizations on stress, and the people who participate seem to find it much more effective than I personally do. I feel I'm missing something by doing it that way.
After a 3-hour Zoom seminar, I am much more exhausted than I am in a 6-hour face-to-face workshop.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Totally.
You don't get the energy. That's the big issue for me, is feeling the energy from the person when you're doing it.
Exactly, exactly, so true.
Because of the mirror neurons. When we're in the same room, I've seen you walk in a room and you pick up the vibes right away, right? Because you've probably got a big mirror neuron receptor here. But if you're going through the screen, we lose probably 50%, maybe even 80% of that capacity.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you have to work harder to watch the body gestures because you're not picking up the unspoken vibes.
If I tell a joke and I can't hear a response, it's
So once
Right.
you write this article, how do we get hold of it, Richard?
Oh, I wasn't going to write it. I'm just going to give it as a speech.
Oh, okay.
Writing is a much more difficult process than just going blah, blah, blah.
I agree with that.
What I did do last week, though, is I interviewed 9 people, all of whom are working online to get their opinions. And I was surprised I heard much more favorable than I heard negative.
Richard?
I've been doing it for over a year now. It was a slow getting started working online for me.
So fine.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the introversion, extroversion of the therapist has an impact on their response.
Yeah.
And I think we're back. Are we ready to?
Yeah, somebody was calling my name a moment ago.
Richard, Chuck Holland.
Oh, hello, Chuck.
Good day to you. You're doing fantastic. I
Thank
love
you,
the
sir.
thought process I'm doing as you're talking. I'm thinking that 50 years from now, a lot of what's going to be happening is the study of neural pathways and the energy that's flowing in the transactions between us. And attunement is an amazing assignment to think about with that. So I'm applauding the way you're lacing this together. I loved you bringing up accommodation a minute ago. And I want to say I'm feeling attuned to you, even though the neural pathway is going through electronic kinds of stuff. And I think that neural pathway face-to-face is very different from the neural pathway, even auditory or with the visual and the auditory.
Well, it's certainly not the same as what we do in our men's group, Chuck.
That's right.
And you're part of the reason that group works so well.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you want to know more about the neurological, do you know Gregor Zelk and Marcia Zelk? They're transactional analysts from Slovenia. They've just written a book. Unfortunately, at the moment, the title of the book escapes me, but their chapter 5 is wonderful. Yesterday I had a seminar here, and we went through their chapter 5, and they do a wonderful condensation of the neurological research that would support what I'm been talking about here today. if you want later, I can look up the exact title for you. But I think you'd find it a good book. Okay, shall we move on, Lucy?
Yep, ready to
Okay.
roll.
Let's talk about rhythmic attunement. No? Look at these two. Who's in tune with whom? Most likely both with each other, but I have a sense that it's she
Yeah.
who's really trying to adapt herself
Mhm.
to him. All right.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right. Rhythmic attunement, though, in order to be able to play together, they have to be in tune with each other. Rhythmic attunement is the pacing of the therapeutic inquiry, pacing of the teaching, pacing of your jokes, Abe, and at the tempo and the cadence that best facilitates the client's processing. But they're processing of two things, both external information and internal sensations, feelings, and thoughts. And I know for myself, I've got two different brains. Intellectually, my brain goes much faster than my emotional brain. I'm thinking things at a fire speed. But if I get confronted about something, if something catches me by surprise, it always feels like my brain is walking through deep snow, that it's at a very different rhythm than my intellectual functioning. Just imagine what happens to your rhythm if you had to live with this guy. Right? When affect is intense, the awareness of our physical sensations, the processing of perceptions, the ability to reason, and the capacity to relate to others occurs at a different rhythm than when affect is not intense. Right? I was watching the news here. We recently had a shooting in Chicago of a police officer shooting an adolescent boy, which is tragic. Tragic for the boy and his family and for that society that he lives in, but also tragic for the police officer who's in such an intense situation that I am sure that different parts of his brain were functioning at different rhythms so that he could not process the fact that the boy dropped the gun a second before he pulls the trigger. Right? That's the kind of thing we're talking about here, that we have different kinds of brains. Our vagal nerve has a front portion and a back portion, and that they operate differently. And when under stress, they reverse their functioning. Where some clients are quickly aware of their physiological sensations, while others process them very slowly. I know this often in my office when I'm asking somebody, so when you're telling me that story, what's happening in your body right now? And some people can respond and say, oh, my heart's pounding, my breath is shallow. And other people don't even have the language. They don't have the capacity to talk about their body sensation. And we have to work with them so that they can slowly begin to have the vocabulary to describe what's going on inside. An effective in-depth psychotherapy, and probably even good teaching, includes helping each client to experience and express his or her natural rhythm and to respond to the client in his or her unique rhythm. I was doing a workshop, and sitting over on my right-hand side was a woman in her mid-30s, psychiatrist, mother of 3 children, and some of you would probably quickly see her as hyperactive. And I was talking about attunement and did an exercise to slow everybody down. And she said, I hate this. You're making me go so slowly. And I said, well, where did you learn to go so fast? She said, oh, ever since I was in high school, I wanted to go to medical school, but I knew I wasn't so smart. So I had to study twice as much as everybody else. Then I went to medical school, and I also got married at the same time. And then while I'm in medical school, I had 3 children, one after another. And I said, did you ever sleep? And she said, no. I said, come on, just close your eyes a minute and let's see if we can find your natural rhythm. And she wept. And she said how for 15 years, she was always pushing herself to go at somebody else's rhythm to get something done. Her kids' rhythm, her husband, her school, and she had lost the capacity to find her own unique rhythm. If you want to read more about this, I'm just doing a quick summary today. In the book, Relational Patterns, Therapeutic Presence, I'm talking a lot about rhythmic attunement, affective attunement, cognitive attunement, and how we apply that in the field of psychotherapy. So let's look at cognitive attunement. This is putting ourselves into the mind of the other person. Some years ago, there was a really exciting movie called It Takes a Thief to Catch a Thief. Any of you maybe remember that movie? It was about the police went to the prison where there was a jewel thief and said, we'll let you out of prison if you'll teach us how to catch this new jewel thief who is going to rob the museum. So he trains the police on what to do. It's an interesting story because it has a double twist at the end, because he winds up stealing the jewels instead. But it's the whole idea, it takes a thief to catch a thief. Well, one of the reasons I teach about different personality types, and soon you're going to have Van Joins, who does one of his excellent workshops on personality patterns. The reason for understanding personality types is it takes thinking like a borderline to work with a borderline client. It takes thinking like a narcissistic client to work with one, or thinking like a schizoid to be able to work well with one. It's about putting ourselves into the mind of the client. Cognitive attunement is more than understanding what the client says. Cognitive attunement involves attending to the client's way of thinking, the process of how he or she strings ideas together, and her level of reasoning. And I often use Piaget's level of what he calls sensory emotional way of reasoning, or egocentric way of reasoning, magical way of reasoning, inquisitive way of reasoning, or logical. But we don't have time here today to go into those. I save that for when I do a long seminar on child development theory. But those are all the ways that I start thinking about what is the style of thinking of my client. Like all inquiry, cognitive attunement begins with the assumption that I know nothing about the client's experience. Yes, all the TA training you've had, all the university training, all the reading you've done doesn't give you enough information to really know the client's experience. Therefore, with each client, I must continually strive to understand the subjective meaning of the client's thoughts and behaviors. And that's part of cognitive attunement, is realizing that I don't really understand this person, so I have to inquire and inquire and inquire. Cognitive attunement depends on listening for and asking about the client's underlying meanings, rather than simply attending to the content or assuming that we understand. And so that when I'm working with somebody, I'm often saying, so what do you mean by that? Can you give me an example of that? Can you explain that to me? Cognitive attunement includes the psychotherapist or the teachers or the consultant's awareness that the client's script beliefs about self, about others, and about the quality of life were based on conclusions and decisions made under stress at previous developmental age. And this is why it's so important. I'm always encouraging people, study the script system, or what some of you may still be calling bracket system, because it's a great map for understanding the mind of how people experience their world. Because script beliefs reflect the mental capacity of a child whose cognitive functioning is usually pre-concrete and formed by fantasy and magical thinking. Beliefs such as this, beliefs about self, it's all my fault, I'm unlovable, something's wrong with me, or beliefs about other people, people can't be trusted, no one understands me, everyone is out for themselves, or beliefs about the life, that life is difficult, there's no use of trying. So that's what I meant by cognitive attunement. Because it's essential that the psychotherapists understand and appreciate the client's script beliefs and how they are enacted in behavior, fantasy, and physiological reactions in order to collect reinforcing experience to confirm their script beliefs. So as we attune to the client's cognition, we enter the client's cognitive space. We establish a resonance with the clients while using our thoughts and responses as a sounding board. We bring the client's words and nonverbal expressions into ourselves. We take on their meanings, implications, and connections, and then experience their way of thinking ourselves as a kind of as if. So when I've got my client there who is talking about wanting to be a mother and the pain of going through all the troubles of artificial insemination, I want to think about what it's like to be in her mind, to have her worry, to have her desire to be a mother, to have her fear that she'll never be a mother. I want to be able to feel that and experience that. And at the same time, to sit back and be the man that I am, responding to that and give her a sense of me. So I have to be in her mind and simultaneously have my own mind. Okay, let's just take a little stop here for a moment. I'll take one or two questions before I move on.
Okay, a question that just came up from Claire Stokes-Laborde is, Richard, what questions do you consider to be the most insightful when exploring script with your client?
Well, certainly, all the script questionnaires. It's in the back of Burns. What do you say after you say hello? What Steiner had published in one of his books is Holloway did a script questionnaire. There are a number of questionnaires around over time, but I don't use them as a formal questionnaire. Those are certainly things that I think about, and they come up over time. But the basic category is, how do they structure time? How do they structure their relationships with people? What is their love life like? What is their work life like? What are their eating habits? What do they do for recreation? All of those kinds of questions. But mostly what I'm focusing on is phenomenological inquiry. which is, what are you experiencing right this moment in your body? And what are you feeling? What emotion are you experiencing? And what images or thoughts come to your mind when you're having that? And what does that remind you of? And what associations do you have? So when I talk about that, I talk about the most important questions, I think, are phenomenological. They're subjective. Feelings, thought processes, memories, fantasies, body sensation. And if you only did that and nothing else, you would still do a tremendous amount of psychotherapy. Then as I move from phenomenological inquiry to historical inquiry, so I might be working with somebody about what they're feeling and then move to historical. For example, a client comes in and says, oh, I'm so tense coming into your office here for the first time. And I might say, well, my stomach's in and out. I find my neck is tight. And I say, and when your neck is tight and your stomach's in and out, what emotion goes with that? Well, I'm scared. So I might say, so when you're scared and your stomach's in a knot, do you have any memory? Oh yeah, this is just like when I was 9 years old in 4th grade, where I had a mean teacher, and off we go. We're into, so then I might say, well, tell me about that teacher. What's it like being in 4th grade? There's historical inquiry. Then I might move to, how did the person cope? So when you had a mean teacher and when you were sick to your stomach going into school, how did you manage to sit there? Oh, I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything. I just focused on my sick stomach each morning. So you see how we move from phenomenological inquiry to a historical inquiry to how the person coped. And I might say, so sitting there, for a whole year with a teacher like that, what did you conclude? And she said, oh, I conclude it's best not to speak anything. It's best to not be at the top of the class or not be at the bottom of the class. It's best not to be anything. So there you got the script decisions right there. Right? And all of that came out in the first 5 minutes of the first session with somebody. That's part of how I do the questions. So I can't answer the question because I don't think there's any one question that is more productive than others, except to focus on phenomenological inquiry. If you want to read about it, 1996 Transactional Analysis Journal, there's an article written by Rebecca Troutman and myself called Methods of an Integrative Transactional Analysis. That's the article that I did receive one of the Eric Berne Awards for. So October 1996.
So there are a couple questions relating to other parts of TA theory. One of them is when you were giving the example of the client, whether Alexis observed that there was possibly a hurry up driver. And
in
so,
me?
no, apparently not too bad right now. You're staying on pace.
Because I've been hurrying up because I know I got a lot more to present.
you don't seem driven. And how do strokes fit in? How do they fit with and perhaps facilitate a sense of attunement? So there are just a couple of other points in people's thinking from a TA perspective.
I think attunement is the most powerful form of stroking. To know, you just think of yourself, to know that this other person is really in harmony with me. To know that this other person is sensitive to me and to really feel that vibe between us has got to be the most important kind of stroke we can ever get. It certainly beats verbalization. It probably even beats a pat on the back. It's just knowing this other person is here with me and for me. That's the stroke I hope to give, Lucy.
And any comment about being aware of drivers?
I would like to,
Not without taking an hour.
Okay,
To
well done. Right.
Not, yeah,
I
Chuck?
gave a short answer, which was, it's an enhancement to be able to think about different kinds of awareness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Tavy and writing about that, and I was there the day the idea was first conceived, but that's another long story. It's been very useful categorization of how people organize their experience. And I have used it over the years very effectively with people. But generally, it's not something that emerges much in my therapy recently, and I don't know why. Yeah. Chuck, you
And
started
Mark?
to say something?
yes, I did. I had an interesting dialogue with Tavy Kaler on email last week, and interestingly, he has moved from his thoughts about manuscript to a communication process model he calls Model T. And I'm just barely getting into that, but it sounds to me like he moved from the mechanics of manuscript to an attuned, more communication process like you're talking about. So I'm very excited to hear that those two things going together.
Well, I'm sure we have both changed over time. I think we're responding to the whole zeitgeist of our times, where I think as we get older, we realize how important really connections with people are. I just hope that his Model T is as successful as Henry Ford's. Because
Well
Henry
said.
Ford made the automobile available to millions of people.
So both Margaret and Nika would like to know how you typically open a session with ongoing clients. Is there typical? I mean, that's an interesting assumption, but how do you typically?
No, it
open a
usually
session?
starts on the first phone call. You know, where I'm listening to them, I'm trying to get a sense of who they are.
This is with ongoing clients. How do you typically open a session with ongoing clients, not the initial session?
Oh,
So I'm saying, is there a typical? I don't know.
no. Usually I'm quiet. I wait for them to take the lead. You know, I'm waiting to see what they bring up. Now, we've got two choices here. I love doing these question and answer, but I also have at least 20 minutes of material to present, and we have exactly 20 minutes before our stopping time.
And we don't have more questions in the chat right now that I am aware
Okay,
of.
then don't invite any for the moment. Let me cover this, and if necessary, we can run a few minutes over. All right, let's talk about attunement to people's relational needs. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, I was blessed with having a seminar of some really good people that we were always involved in doing some kind of research project. And one of the things we looked at is what were the things that people most frequently talked about in therapy? And when therapy didn't work, it was easier for people to talk about therapy when it didn't work than when it did work, about what was missing for them, but also what worked in marriage relationships, what worked in friendships. And we came up with many, many different things that we called relational needs. Then we did a factor analysis and came up with 8 that were most significant. Interestingly now, these 8 relational needs are being studied at universities in Turkey, Slovenia, Croatia, Czechoslovakia, and Spain. There's a multi-university research project going on looking at the significance of relational needs in people's lives. The first is the need for security in relationship. This is the need to have the visceral experience. I mean, a body experience of having our physical and emotional vulnerabilities protected. Look at that little hand inside that big hand. That's the kind of protection that we all need in relationship, of knowing that if I'm with this person, they're not going to insult me. They're not going to shame me. They're not going to ridicule me. They're not going to hit me. That I am safe in the presence of this other person. Security is that sense of simultaneously being vulnerable and in harmony with the other. It includes the absence of both actual or anticipated dangers. And what is the attunement? Therapeutic attunement involves an empathetic awareness that the other person's need for security in relationship, and a reciprocal response in which the other's vulnerability is served. And look at this connection here. This woman looks like she's in great stress. I was imagining maybe she's grieving, and this woman here is providing that kind of connection with her, responding to her need for security. When we do that, it communicates non-verbally. Your needs and feelings are normal and acceptable to me. Number 2, validation, affirmation, and significance in relationship. To have the other person validate the significance and functions of our interpsychic process, to validate our affect, fantasy, and our personal construction of meaning. And I love this little guy with his thumb up. You know, when we give somebody the thumb up, that often means we're validating you. The psychotherapist's affective reciprocity, the affective attunement with the client's feelings, validates the client's affect and provides affirmation and normalization of the client's relational needs. Number 3, look at this boy and the older woman, how he's relying on her. He can't read yet, she's reading to him, but it's acceptance by a stable, dependable, and protective other person. To have somebody we can rely on, to get useful information, guidance, and wisdom, to have protection from one's own interpsychic conflicts and escalation of affect. Winnicott, in writing about what people need from a psychotherapist, says that everybody needs a psychotherapist who is older, wiser, and stronger. All right. I remember when I was looking around New York for a psychoanalyst, somebody said, "Why are you being so fussy?" I said, "I need an analyst who is going to be tougher than I am and who is going to be able to get to the depth of me." I needed somebody to rely on. This sometimes looks like idealizing, but often what appears to be idealizing is an unconscious desire for protection. The degree to which an individual hopes that someone will be reliable, consistent, and dependable is directly proportional to the quest for interpsychic protection, affect containment, safe self-expression, or beneficial insight. So we all look to somebody to rely on, you know, from the little child who needs father to teach him how to cross the street safely, to the old person hoping that their physician knows exactly what to do to relieve the pain and to stop their suffering. Well, the same thing in psychotherapy. Our clients need to look up to us. In education, our clients need to be able to look up to the teacher and rely on them. And this is one of the important reasons, probably the most important reason for having ethics. Because our clients need us to function morally and ethically. What's the therapeutic reciprocity? Being consistent, reliable, and dependable. This is the client-centered reason to conduct ourselves in an ethical way. Number 4, confirmation of personal experience. To have one's life experience confirmed through mutuality and a shared experience. The need to have one's experience confirmed is manifested by the desire to be in the presence of someone who is similar, to be with someone who understands because he or she has a like experience. Then reciprocity is provided by the psychotherapist revealing carefully selected personal experiences. By prudently sharing vulnerabilities, similar feelings, personal stories, or fantasies, and by being personally present and vital. Now, this is where, particularly in the psychotherapy field, there's a big theoretical split. Does the therapist tell the client their own experience? Do you reveal? You know, the client is talking about being in a difficult marriage. Do you, as a therapist, talk about the difficulties in your marriage? Or do you stay sterile? Do you stay somebody who is wise, but not revealing? The difference doesn't depend on the theory. The difference depends on the client. If we need somebody to look up to, if the relational need is to have somebody who's dependable and protective, then our sharing our own personal experience isn't significant. But if we need somebody with a shared experience, somebody who knows what it's like to been depressed and to overcome it, somebody who knows what it's like to be in a divorce and has managed it and overcome it, then it becomes important to share our experiences, not because of theory, but because of what the client needs. Number 5, self-definition. Look at how this guy is defining himself. Isn't he a great guitar player? All right, you can just hear his melody. Well, at least in his fantasy. He's expressing his uniqueness. And self-definition is to not only know and express our uniqueness, but to receive acknowledgement and acceptance from another. Self-definition is the communication of one's self-chosen identity through the expression of preferences, interests, and ideas without humiliation or rejection. Sometimes the expression of self-definition even takes adversarial forms where people will argue with you. Or I have one client who always said no, even when he was agreeing with me. Think of those kinds of adversarial situations, those disagreements, as the person's need to define themselves. And what's the reciprocity? When the psychotherapist consistently supports the client's expression of identity and normalization of the need for self-definition. Such attunement requires the therapist or the teacher's consistent presence, contactfulness, and respect, even in the face of disagreement. Need number 6, to make an impact. Well, if she had this megaphone in your ear, she'd be making an impact. To experience the sense of agency and efficacy, to have an effect on the other person, to be in charge, to influence the other in some way. And this is a normal need. All of these are needs that every one of us, you and me, have throughout our life. The fact that I'm giving this talk today is partly my need to make an impact. I want to influence this profession of transactional analysis to affect a change in people, and how important it is to honor and respect that need. Because an individual sense of competency in relationships emerges from our ability to attract another's attention and interest, to influence the interests of others, and to affect change or affect a change or in affect or behavior in the other person. One of the things that I want to do periodically in my work, in my supervision, in the therapy, is to find out what I'm doing that the people in my groups don't like. What did they want me to do differently? To invite them to say no, so that they can make an impact on me, and how they're making that impact. Therapeutic reciprocity to the client's need to have an impact occurs when the psychotherapist allows herself to be emotionally impacted by the client and to respond to that impact with sensitivity. Reciprocity may include soliciting the client's criticism of the therapist's behavior. A hard thing for many therapists to do, but a very useful thing to do. And then making the necessary changes so the client has a sense of impact within the therapeutic relationship. And I have found that for some clients, that is the therapy, because they can't come from families and school systems where they could never make an impact. What they felt, what they thought, never influenced the other person. And when I allow that in the therapy, that is the therapy, not so much the content of what we talk about. To have the other initiate. This picture is from our local rodeo. What you would love to see is the whole video where the father had just been in riding a bucking horse, and the father had gotten a lot of points in the rodeo, and the boy had taken his hat off and thrown it in the ring. And after the father jumped off the horse, he went over to the ring, picked up the hat, came around, and put it on his proud son's head. And I thought, oh, what an initiating dad. It's to have the other person take responsibility and initiate in making interpersonal contact. And I have found in my supervision, particularly with transactional analysts, so often TA therapists are afraid of initiating because we're afraid of being in the rescuer position in a drama triangle. But often our clients need us to reach out. They need us to make that special phone call. They need us to initiate interpersonal contact, to get out of our chair and go sit on the sofa next to them and maybe hold their hand, or to take a major share of the therapeutic work. For some clients, that's necessary. They need us to initiate. And the last one for today, the need to express love, to demonstrate gratitude, thankfulness, or affection by doing something for another person. When the client's need is to have the other initiate. Oh, sorry, got out of sequence. The importance of the relational need to give love, whether it be from children to parents, to siblings, teachers, or from client to therapists, is often overlooked in the practice of psychotherapy. How many clients have been rebuffed by the therapist not understanding why the gift was there. I remember doing a workshop years ago where the therapist had done a splendid job. We were way over time. It was 9 o'clock at night. We went out to a restaurant as a whole group, and the therapist in the group was sitting there like this with a sore neck. So I thought I was going to do something wonderful. I got up, I came behind him, I started to massage his neck, and he turned around and he said, "What do you want from me? Why are you buttering me up? Stop manipulating me." And it was like he stuck a knife in my heart. But he didn't realize that my massaging his neck was my gratitude. What did I need at that moment? I needed him to receive my massage gracefully. Right? The therapeutic reciprocity, accepting the client's need to express appreciation, gratitude, and affection, and to receive it gracefully. I've given a quick run through. If you want to know more about this, particularly the relational methods of psychotherapy, take a look at the book Beyond Empathy, right? Where the things I've talked about today are spelled out much more in detail. Now, if you notice, we had 8 relational needs here. But I did not have on the list the need to receive love. Why not? Anybody want to guess? Or let me preempt your guess. If we have a sense of security in the relationship, if we have a shared experience, if we feel validated, if we can look up to the person and rely on them, if we can define ourselves, if we can make an impact, if they initiate, we feel loved. And then, out of abundance, we can express that need to have love. And that's what I think is the most essential ingredients in psychotherapy, in education, even in our consulting work. Thank you.
I think we're sending you a lot of love right now, Richard. People are putting their appreciation in the chat, which will send
We're
you
at the
later on.
We're at the end of our official time. I try to make sure that we did end it right at this hour, but I'm willing to hang around for a little bit and talk if any of you have questions. Thank you, Millie, for buying.
Ciao, ciao.
Richard, I feel a lot of overlap for the Christian ministry of my 50 years as a minister, where the attunement, if I'd had a better understanding of that, I think I would have helped me in some situations. Thank you very much for the workshop. I really am attuned to where you were today.
Well, it's taken me 50 years to learn this, Bob. So welcome to the journey.
Well,
yeah.
Glad to
but
be
you know,
aboard.
this is exactly what every pastor needs. Which is probably why the book I'm Okay, You're Okay was such a big seller among the Christian clergy. Because it spoke to what people needed.
Also, with games, Born to Win is another one.
Yep. Yep. Okay, somebody else want to say a thing?
Thank you.
A lot of thank yous to you in the chat, Richard.
Yeah.
Okay. I would be distracted from us right now if I read the chat, but I'll get to that later. Yeah. I just want to make sure that all of you had a chance to speak if you wished.
Thank you, Richard. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, where are you from, Susan?
I'm an American. It's in Norwich in the UK.
In Norwich. Well, thank you for joining.
No, thank you.
Richard, Abbott Brownell in San Diego. I've been about with Hedges Capers a long time ago. I'm completely out of the TA loop. How can I get in touch with somebody? I know that there's an address in Concord, California, but that's not very much help for me. Is there somebody I can talk to around?
Yeah, right at the top of my screen, I'm looking at Lucy. She's got her connections all over the TA world more than I have. And I would start by contacting Lucy. Do you see her up there? Or somebody.
But it's a great way if you could go to the USATAA website.
Right.
A lot of contact information that you can initiate contact with people generally in the USA and maybe even people in your own region and your neighborhood.
Yeah, right. Who's Lucy? Who is that?
Frederick.
I just put my my email in the chat if anyone wants to email me directly, and USATAA.org. And I will refer you to the right people with the questions that you have.
And hi, Abbott. I'm in San Diego. I live up in Vista.
Oh, okay.
So let's connect.
Okay.
That's Wayne Hart.
Wayne Hart. Okay.
And I know that name.
Your email, Wayne.
Hi, Richard. It's
Hello,
only
Wayne.
been 40 years, you know.
Yeah. But Abbott, when you're talking about Hedges Capers,
right.
I actually started my training in TA with David Cuffer.
Okay.
And then David died and Hedges replaced him. Hedges was my sponsor for my CTA, my clinical exam. And Hedges was very much, I think, liked what I'm teaching today. He didn't have the vocabulary to describe it, but he lived what I'm covering here today.
Yeah. I came.
He put it into practice.
Yes, he did. Yeah. I moved out from Buffalo, New York to partially to be with Hedges and get out of the cold. So, yeah.
Well, he had a warm heart.
Yes, he did.
And he was always very good to me.
What I know about that is just his hand thing. Yeah.
Hi, Richard. I'm from Alberta, Canada.
Yeah. Hello, neighbor.
Hi. I'm at the University of Calgary. I'm taking a master's postgraduate in educational research. And I write papers on TA all the time, and I'm getting such resistance from I was told that burn is, on my last paper yesterday, that burn was archaic and irrelevant. And I want to know about your study, about the intergroup study on the relational needs. Do you include TA in that inter-university study?
Yes and no. It depends on whether you consider the concept of relational needs TA or not. Yes. Certainly, the Eric Byrne Award Committee considered it such because the article in which I wrote about it and the book in which I wrote about it received the Eric Byrne Award. So is it TA? Yes.
Yes.
Do they use other TA terminology in doing those research programs? Probably not. I'm sort of a peripheral consultant on those research projects. I'm not directly involved in doing them. But I can tell you that the person in Slovenia who's doing the research is a transactional analyst. The person in Turkey who's doing it is a transactional analyst. And the people in Spain who are guiding the research are transactional analysts. I don't know about Croatia or Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I just wanted some evidence that it's relevant to go back to that instructor. So thanks so much.
Well, first of all, the person who said that burn is no longer relevant certainly doesn't understand the history of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Would they say that Freud is no longer relevant? Well, some of those things that Freud said
You might.
don't fit experience. They're just concepts.
Sure.
It was only this week I was reading the letters between Freud and Einstein when Freud said, and I loved it when I came across it, my theories are mythology.
Wow.
And he
Wow.
described his theory as a mythology. And this is wonderful admission. It takes it out of the whole idea of being true, because we wouldn't think of mythology as truth. We think of it as telling a story.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to share a thought in response to this fellow or whoever it was that said that to you. I would ask, let's talk about content and tell me whether that's irrelevant. The kinds of things we're talking about, is that irrelevant? The other thing I wanted to say, Richard, are you going to let us get copies of the slides?
No,
No, okay.
no, that's something that I might publish, but you certainly can get the video from this and make use of it.
Okay, that's
And the content of it you'll find in the 96 article that I mentioned, and in the book Beyond Empathy.
what was the name of the article?
Methods of an Integrative Transactional Analysis, October 1996.
And the last thing is, Richard, I thought you were excellent, not only in your content, but in your delivery. Your examples were wonderful. And I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Abe. You know, and I've always admired you, and I wish I had your skill to illustrate and create metaphor by jokes. You've got a style that I have always admired, and I don't know how to reproduce it, but thank you. I appreciate your compliment.
Well.
I think I'm such a good joke teller.
Oh, I do.
Ask me why I think I'm such a good joke teller.
Why do you think
Are
you're
you a
good
good joke teller?
Timing. Okay.
Which is a little hard when you've got Zoom interruptions. Anybody
Richard?
else?
Hi
Hello,
there.
Joe.
Hi, Joe from the UK. I've recently come across some work from a lady called Sarah Paynton, who's got a book out called Your Resonant Self. And there's so many things that align to what you've been speaking about. And I think it's so wonderful. One of the things that she talks about is empathy guesses. So when working with clients, to make a guess of what their feelings might be and make a suggestion around what their needs might be, as a way of getting them to feel the resonance and move into the right.
I think that's what Byrne meant by intuition.
Yeah.
Right. And also so necessary. If you think about kids coming from families where the family never talked about the emotionally important things that were happening, there was no communication about affect. And that's actually what we mean by learning the mother's tongue. For example, children don't know how to talk about feelings until they're trained. So mother's in the kitchen washing dishes, and she hears a kid crying in the other room, and she goes in the room and she said, what's happening? Kid goes, huh? Huh? She says, did you fall down? No. Did you scratch yourself? No. Did you get hurt in some way? No. So you notice how she's providing linguistic categories. She said, I was in the other room and you were alone. You couldn't find me. Did you get scared? So you were scared. And then the kids could say, yeah, I'm scared. So when it happens 2 or 3 days later, he can now say, Mama, I'm scared when I can't find you. She's teaching about affect, and she's taking body sensation and affect and giving a vocabulary, creating a language, and creating social communication. And it's that whole network. And many times, probably you and I've had clients who sit there, they can't talk about feelings because they don't even have the vocabulary.
Nice.
And they don't have the experience to talk about feeling. And we have to provide not just the vocabulary, maybe even the concept.
Wayne.
And now that's every kindergarten teacher knows that. A good, successful kindergarten teacher knows that many of the kids in this classroom cannot talk about their feelings. And that's why we sit in the circle and have feeling talks so kids can process sensation to affect, to words, to communication. And I bet that's what that author is getting at.
Oh, I absolutely agree. The ability to put language to what someone's feeling is a huge part of my experience of working with clients. Yeah.
Now, the problem with language, and Vygotsky, the Russian linguist, makes this very clear. Language is beautiful because it allows somebody else to understand us. You know, so that if I tell you about my grief or my worries, and you have a greater understanding of me. He also says the problem with language is it never communicates well enough. Language of one person's experience to another. So although it's wonderful that you can understand me, you don't fully understand me. And there's always that gap. And that's why I think we have to inquire and inquire and inquire. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
What's the author's name again?
Sarah Payton.
Yes, I've heard the name, but I don't know the book. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. She's a British psychoanalyst?
No, she's Canadian.
Canadian.
And she does family constellations and nonviolent communication is her background.
Okay, I must have her mixed up with somebody else. Okay.
Yeah, she does a lot with the neurological side of things. So actually her book talks a lot about how the resonance affects the brain.
Did she just write a book on Porges's polyvagal theory as applied in clinical practice?
Well, her book's called Your Resonant Self. I'm not sure if, yeah.
Somebody mentioned it yesterday in my seminar.
It's
because
wonderful.
we were talking about Porges's polyvagal theory and how it affects people's emotion.
Yeah, and she also talks about yak punkset, and the grief panic neurological system as well, and this concept of alarmed aloneness, which is really resonated with me around panic and aloneness, and that need for accompaniment and resonance to heal that.
Well, if I can make one more plug, you might find interesting then an article of how I apply that in practice in the December issue of the International Journal of Integrative Psychotherapy. I wrote an article about, it has the word withdrawal in the title. Oh, it's called Relational Withdrawal, about working with a client who was deeply alone, but filled up the therapy space with chatter, blah, 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 in order not to feel the aloneness. So the International Journal of Integrative Psychotherapy, and those articles are free. You don't have to buy them. And I think you probably all know, it's called Relational Withdrawal. And if you go to the journal, put in my name and look for the article that says withdrawal in the title. And I think it'll speak to what you're saying, Joe.
Do you see Zumrad's hand up? Zumrad?
Oh, Zumrad, no.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks, Lucy.
I want to ask a question about intuition, because you said that adult ego state has intuition. And I wonder, I always thought that intuition actually lives in a child ego state.
Yes, a lot of our colleagues teach that. And yes, children have intuition.
So does it mean adult has a different sort of intuition? Where that comes, that intuition?
Experience, putting ideas together, a wide variety of perception, guessing, the ability to think abstractly. That's why the intuition of an adult is far more different than the intuition of a child. The child doesn't have the capacity to, well, it depends on what age child you're talking about, but say an 8-year-old doesn't have the capacity to think in terms of logic or abstractly. So, but the intuition of a child is going to be very concrete. Or the intuition of a very young child is going to be much more sensory motor. They feel something about the other person. You ever watch how little kids will come into a room full of people and they'll shy away from some grown-ups and they gravitate to others, even though they're all strangers. That's a sensory motor kind of intuition. I hope we keep that as we grow up, although many of us lose that because it's trained out of us in school. So, you know, Zuma, it really depends on what definition you're using of ego states. If you use a rather simple definition, yes, the intuition's in the child. Part of what happened to TA, in my impression, is that Byrne, when he got very popular, after he wrote Bane's People Play, it sold 1 million copies in the first year. And he was invited to be dinner speakers at many things like the Rotary Club and the Lions Club and things like that, where he had to give a 20-minute after dinner speech after people had their cocktails and their dinner. And he tried to make TA very simple and palatable to that kind of an audience. And I think he simplified his own theory so much that he lost the profoundness of it. If you want further explanation, look at the, I think, 1981 article that Rebecca Troutman and I wrote on models of ego states and the importance of keeping each model separate because each model has its own purpose.
Thank you.
Are you still there, Joe? Or Zumrad?
Yes.
Zumrad. I'm sorry, I got mixed up. Zumrad, who I was talking to, disappeared.
Yes, I'm here. And I'm saying thank you. That's really very helpful.
Yeah. Take a look at that article because that article says the importance of keeping the theories separate because each theory has its purpose. Okay, Monica?
Hi, Richard. I wanted to ask you about the drama triangle, and something you said today really resonated with me, that the psychotherapists, we are really worried to go into the rescuer mode. And I also remember something you said in a different workshop, that if we present to the client a piece of theory, it can be really alienating or shaming. And on a personal level, I find drama triangle actually quite unhelpful piece of theory. I never got on with it very well. Just wanted to check whether you ever use it. Do you ever think that way? Is it helpful? Because it doesn't seem quite attuned to present the cases in that way.
When it's not attuned, don't use it. Just make that a simple, when it doesn't really fit the person. But there are some people who have really gravitated to it, particularly if they need an intellectual understanding of their behavior and somebody else's behavior and how they intersect with each other. For that kind of person, sitting down and drawing it out, giving examples can be very healthy, very, very helpful. But it sounds like in your case, the timing wasn't right. and how it was represented with shaming. But that's true of any theoretical thing we give, any explanation or interpretation, if not timed well, can be shaming.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Richard Abbott again. I like what you said about the different models. Do you remember Eric Byrne had a conceptual grid in what do you say after you say hello, and about a whole bunch of different ways to go about doing things. And that was, you know, and I've used that idea quite a few times in reading TA, keep stuff straight.
Yes. Remember earlier today when somebody asked me about rackets and I went, oh my God, there's 9 different definitions.
Right.
Well, if we're going to talk about rackets, we've got to define first which definition we're talking about.
Right.
And not mix those definitions together.
Yeah.
You know, is it a substitute feeling? Is it a manipulation? Is it a cover-up for something? Is it the reason people play games? Is it the payoff at the end of games? All of those are the different definitions, and you can't have them all happening at once.
No, but they're interrelated to each other like a Gordian knot, as far as I'm concerned.
And that's why we did the racket system. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to go back and I don't have any TA journals after 1980. I have to. Can you get them?
Okay. I'm going to tell you how to. I'm going to tell you how to do it and how to do it cheaply.
Oh, yes.
If you want an article, it costs you $20.
Yeah.
If you want 2 articles, it'll cost you $40.
Right.
You want 3 articles, it'll cost you $60.
Right.
However, you can buy a membership for $40.
Right.
And then you can have 1,000 articles for free.
Yeah. Okay. Good. You can still.
So join ITAA.
Right.
Buy the basic membership at least.
Right.
And then you get a code number that allows you to have even the bulletin.
Oh, good God. Yeah. I remember the bulletins.
Yeah. Remember the big thing that came in a round binder?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Richard, we met, by the way, about 30, 40 years ago when they had the 1980 ITAA conference here in San Diego. I gave you a ride up in my car from wherever the hotel was up to Hedges' house on La Jolla Boulevard. You and a couple other people. You probably wouldn't remember it, but I thought, gee whiz, I had one of the TA biggies in my little Volkswagen or whatever it was. Yeah.
I remember somebody giving me a ride, Abbott. I'm embarrassed that I don't remember you. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, you're supposed to remember all those years back. I mean, yes, but I just always remembered you for that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I can remember Reese back. I just don't remember the phone call I have to make today.
Yeah. Oh.
All right, we've got about 5 more minutes before I have to get to another appointment. Anybody else want to say anything in the last 5 minutes?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It's Müjde. Hi.
Would you say your name again?
It's Müjde.
Where are you from?
Originally, I'm from Turkey, but I moved
Okay.
to Michigan, US after that. And I really know a lot of people from Turkey that work with you through this integrated. Yeah.
Good night.
A lot of I'm friends with you, Richard. Back in Turkey, they love you and they talk about you a lot. So this workshop is amazing for me because this is the first time I listen to you. So I have a question about this attunement. So in the therapy, this is amazing experience for client, right? Because we accept how he or she is, and this attunement help them to be their self in the session with the therapeutic relationship with us. But sometimes I'm confused about dependency. So at one point they can feel like, okay, I don't want to lose my therapist because this is a wonderful relationship, and they want to stay there sometimes for a long time, and especially sometimes when they get better, and when you try to have the less sessions with them, they can be very anxious at that point, and they think that, oh, okay, I don't want to leave you, I don't want to leave this therapeutic relationship. So I'm wondering, how do you work with that?
Well, I certainly have a lot of experience with that because I had to close down my big practice in New York when I moved to Vancouver. Took me 3 years in the process. I closed a couple of training groups. So I had experience with lots of goodbyes. Among my patients, it was different. Everyone was different. Some people, I didn't give them more than a few months' notice. Other people had 2-year notice. But then we have to come back to the concept of what you call dependency or dependability. I would rather see the psychotherapist be dependable than the client have dependency. And I think dependency is the way they're telling the therapist, I need to be able to rely on you. I need you to be consistent. I need you to be there for me. Now, what is the ending of psychotherapy? Often, I think that therapists don't know what else to do, how to take people into the depth of the boredom, how to take people to the depth of that very infantile pain or fear. And so we're keeping the therapy here and now oriented and cognitive. And the client is trying to say, but I need a different quality of therapy. So I'm thinking, I don't worry about dependency. I'm thinking about, am I consistent? Am I reliable? Is our work here dependable? And it might be that I can't provide it. Like when I was getting ready to move, I made it very clear that yes, you want to stay, but we are coming to an end. Sometimes it's almost like a little amputation. Yeah. Well, thank you all.
Richard, we have come to an end. It's 1:30.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you, Richard. Thank you so much. Thank you, all participants. Just a quick announcement. We have many upcoming workshops planned by the USATAA. Bob, if you could throw the slide in. There you go. The next one, please mark your calendars, May 29th. Remember, it's Eastern time. And until we meet again, goodbye and good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and stay blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to work with you.
It's been fun.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye,
Richard.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye, Millie.
Ciao.
Nicola, goodbye.
Bye.
Sì, sì.
Lo fai tu? Just gonna stay and capture the chat. If anyone wants
Bob
to add
and
anything
Lucy,
to
would
the
you
chat,
stay?
I'll capture.
Bob, Lucy, would you guys stay online just a couple of minutes?
Sure.
Yes, we can.
And I guess we can stop the recording.
Yes, we can. Okay. I'm gonna take this slide down and.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Adesso era così spento. Un po'. Richiedi il
Chiudi.
chiudi. Però questo qui non ha sulla registrazione. Boh, speriamo che sia rimasto. Basta. Comunque adesso le slide ci saranno.
So we're down to 13 people online yet. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Rob.
Hey, Diane.
And Bob, I think you
Yes.
can.
I'm going to leave in a minute. I just wanted to thank you, that group, for that. It was wonderful. So good to see you all, and I'll be leaving you.
Look at his shirt.
Yes.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
That's a USATAA shirt. And we have to consider how many of us need to have one of those.
I want one.
You had a different one on before. You had a hoodie on before.
Even, yes, I have had on 4 different ones today.
Well, I couldn't keep up with you. Too many costume changes.
If you will email me at cwh7institute@gmail, I will tell you how to do it, and they're very economical. And I also have another background of very dressy dress shirts for women and men that are hand done for the individuals that have our logo on them also. So thank you for your work to do this. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Frederick. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you.
And nice to see you, Nastaran and
Good to see
Dawn.
you,
And we're going
Chuck.
to go into our meeting now.
See you later.
Yeah. And perhaps you can, for Dawn and Nastaran may not be paying attention. They may have wandered off. So I think you can go to the participant list, Bob.
Uh-huh.
And can you bring it down to us?
Okay, let's see. See, I'm not, okay, I think.
And we can go ahead and chat, but it would be nice.
I can mute them all.
Well, they're muted.
They're muted and their
Camera is
screen
off,
is
so they're
off.
not-
Yeah.
They're not here, so, but you can't drop, I believe you can next to each person. I think you have a choice of dropping them.
Okay,
On the
Oops.
participant list.
yes. Oh,
Well, I haven't had this version of Zoom up yet, which is why I had a lot of questions.
okay,
Haven't been in the
I'm not sure
control
I'll do it. I'm just gonna keep them muted. That's all. There's only 2 people there, I think.
Well, before we process this, let me ask you this question, Bob.
Yes.
Have you explored this question of different licenses that go with our Zoom account since we're paying for it?
I've explored some. I think I need to do more work on that. I'm not ready to say a definitive list, but I think probably there is a way of adding numbers to that.
I suggest,
Go ahead.
I'm not so sure about, what I'm curious about is how Freddie and I, and whoever else, possibly, Diane, would be able to either co-host or initiate if you were not there. And I think that's by assigning licenses, that we're all on the
Yes.
same account, but that by assigning
Okay,
licenses.
I could-
would like us to try
could
that out
also-
sometime.
Okay, I think
Just as an
we
experiment,
can
let's do
that.
it let's do a learning group about that sometime so we can pass back and forth and, just because, one of us could get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
So-
Like good example is when for a council meeting, I was going through major surgery.
Right,
So-
and we had to work with one of your neighbors and friends and, yeah.
Yes, it worked well, but yes, I think that
I
maybe,
know-
I just think that giving a password out and the Zoom number, I think maybe that can be taken care of. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
that
work
can
on,
be,
I will-
so let's have, I just want to put a marker in for at least the 3 of us to have a Zoom tutorial. And Diane, if you want to play, sometimes you might not want to, but if you want to, so that we can work within, while we still have this level of subscription. Because I think we may want to shift to co-hosting and going to a different kind of subscription that's less expensive down the
I
road.
think so too.
We have a couple more months, but anyway, I just want to say, I offer to be part of such a learning group so that we get some more fluency. Is that enough about that? Let's just have a big hooray about this fabulous workshop that went so well. At the
Amen.
most, we had 132.
It really did work well. There are some things that I learned as itinerant registrar, but I just thought it was really fantastic, and I loved it.
Okay, there was
Congratulations, Freddie
133 at the peak.
and Bob. Yeah, I watched when I have records of when, when there were more and when there were fewer, and also of the follow-ups that people have requested. A lot of
Okay, I noticed that probably there were several people I bet took potty breaks, and then they left the meeting and then tried to return. And I had to do the same. I just left the screen on so they'd see the USATAA and ran back and did my thing and came back.
Did you have to admit people back in from the waiting room?
Yeah, several times. Yeah, yes, I think several times.
I think, Bob, I don't know with this subscription, but with what I have, when the scheduling is done, there is a advanced options. There's a button where they don't need our permission to come in once they've come in first. Like you admit them once first. If the internet kicks them out, they can come in automatically. That would be one useful thing. The other useful thing, we had about 212 people on Eventbrite registered. And many of them didn't show up. Some of them were emailing me and asking the time. So I think the next time when we do it, I think we need to make it clear about the time zone difference. One of the persons was in the morning at 9 o'clock. She says, how come I'm not able to get in and nobody's there? And I said, no, but you're in UK time. It's not time yet for you to come in. So it is their confusion. Yes, I understand. But I think when in the Eventbrite, somewhere, I think we need to make sure that they understand that there is that time difference. Maybe we can put a few key ones.
We need to put, I put all the ones that are US time zones. Those are in there.
Yeah.
All the US time zones are in there. We can put another line saying,
please
look
check
up
your local
what time this
zone.
is. Yeah, check for what this is in your local time. Because
Right.
Eventbrite changes it to the user's time.
Oh, they do.
Or some of
Yes.
it, because I know I got some that were in my time rather than in Eastern time.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what all people are getting. I know there was.
The other thing I thought was, it's so nice that Richard would give half an hour extra time to people who want to stay behind and talk. But I think what we can do is we can break at 2 hours and have a formal goodbye to the meeting. I mean, we kind of fizzled out in the end. And I want to insist on saying